Welcome to the latest episode of the Informing Choices mini-pod. In this episode, in collaboration with Sylvia Gallusser and Silicon Humanism, we are continuing our exploration of the future of connected entertainment experiences with Forward Studio co-founder and Chief Strategy Officer Rachel Noonan. A quick reminder that our working definition of a connected entertainment refers to a new paradigm of interactive, personalized, and networked experiences across digital media. It represents a shift from passive consumption of content to dynamic engagement where complementary technologies collaborate to deliver more intelligent, adaptive, and connected entertainment. In the last episode, we looked at definitions, current trends, and the near future for seamless contemporary connected entertainment experiences. In this episode, we are exploring some scenarios and the potential implications for life, society, and business. Rachel, in the report, there's a link in the podcast description. You introduced three scenarios exploring the connected entertainment world in the 2030s, which on the one hand seems like it's years away. On the other, certainly in the context of how things develop, is probably not that far away at all. Take us through the scenarios, if you would.
Yeah, I think where scenarios are concerned, what companies tend to do is they use them to look at horizons that are extremely far out, 15, 20 years, and those futures seem mythical and unreachable, right? And they seem like, stories of a future that probably won't be. So what we do is we look to the near future and we try and imagine kind of iterations of, how technology can evolve the now, and it actually allows us to contextualize that future in a more real way. So when you're using scenarios, and for those who don't necessarily know what they are, they're just a tool where you take a variety of maybe strong or soft signals and drivers and trends and factors that might shape the future, and you use them to create stories. Some call it speculative fiction. Others make them into movies that also inspire the future, which is extremely cool. And it just, romanticizes what could possibly be. And the futures that we imagined, one's really focused on blurring the lines around what, realities can be as it relates to actually the underground water world that we don't traverse very often. That world is kind of, odd and wonderful in its own right. But what happens when technology is able to blur the lines and play a little bit with what entertainment, downstairs looks like. And a lot of the technologies, if you go to Disneyland, for example, you see tones of it, right? When you see a lot of their shows, you see them using projection in fun ways with light, and, they play with water a little bit. What it also does when you think about those kinds of use cases is imagines what what our life could look like in alternative realities, and how entertainment can, I don't want to say, deceive, but how do characters live in different worlds from a place that we already know. So with a Little Mermaid and Ariel, and the imagination that people already have as it relates to those characters, we kind of brought one to life in relation to that, and it, essentially with new technology. So we based it on a new technology. Another one of the scenarios is really around the power of technology to allow, say, people with disabilities um, to see the world in different ways. So imagine somebody is in a wheelchair and they actually plug into a neural interface, a headband that allows them to essentially experience, climbing mountains, which is something that they would never ever be able to do. And again, we're looking at things that are close to reality because haptic feedback is a thing.
Yeah.
There's actually an episode in Black Mirror, which is the most recent season, where two guys who game together sit down, put their headsets on, and they have these tiny little, essentially buttons that they put on the sides of their heads that allow them to essentially touch, feel, and smell in that world. And not only does it blur the lines with what's real and wrong, it in the episode, their sexuality is opaque in it, which is really interesting because they're feeling something for somebody that they haven't never felt before in a real scenario, real life, real scenario of life. So that concept of being able to put on a headset and, feel the snow beneath your feet and feel the wind, against your face is feasible. It's never going to replace, I don't think it's ever going to replace the real thing, but if we can get people, as close as possible, there's something quite beautiful there. Especially if you're thinking about how do you use that for PTSD? How do you use that for sense memory? How do you use that for people with Alzheimer's? So that's the play with scenarios as well. If you let it go, it can kind of allow you to see other use cases.
Mhm.
And then one of our other scenarios is just pure play. It's just about giant fun augmented reality Jenga, which allows you to play anytime, anywhere. And again, we are inspired by signals and products that are in the market now. And Twister actually has an AR product. You can play Twister AR right now, and I think it's super fun, and I think it's really bold of them to have launched it, because it's a lot of work and it's still technically challenging, right? There's a lot of tensions with that, and we're seeing it now. I mean, with the AR glasses, once you have a lot of the factors, obviously lighting is probably one of the biggest challenges with being able to realize that future. But what it also does is take somebody who, say, lives in, Uruguay and can't get out of the house, and they're home with their kids and they're tired and they just want to, they just want to play and they can't get to the store, whatever the scenarios are. Or you want to play virtually with a friend, your friend's in Uruguay and you're in Toronto and you want to throw on some headsets. That also is probably one of the best, I would say, moonshots for what a truly connected experience is in the future. So they're just meant to show people what could be, but also based in reality. So
Yeah.
people won't dispel it automatically, which they tend to do a lot of the times when they see these scenarios. They're like, sure, whatever, it's never going to happen.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Rachel, I really love the three scenarios you're describing and how you put them together also in the report. I also like and appreciate what you're saying about how fiction can inspire also to think about the future. And the episode you mentioned from Black Mirror, actually, which I think is really excellent, is a good illustration of how our avatars, how our digital identity can actually have an impact on our real identity, how we can maybe explore some aspect of our identity, in that case, gender fluidity or gender differences, because the guy who plays the role of a woman, and that kind of has an impact about the relationship between these two guys. And then it has an impact on their family, on their friendship, and so on. And that's a really big topic that we have, and that's Silicon Humans, and we love to mention those topics as well. How do we expect, and what is your take on this? How do we expect those avatars, those personalities that we develop online, how do we expect them to have an impact on our real life? And are there any risks associated to this, especially about like with young people who are going through a variety of different worlds, and they explore a variety of identity and different part of it throughout the days. What's your take on this? Really curious to hear what you think.
It's such a good example of a somewhat safe space to be able to play with your identity. And I mean, Second Life was somewhat first permutation of that, the online platform where you could create an avatar. It was all 2D, and you could be whoever it was you wanted to be, for a moment, for life. And then it allowed you to ask questions that maybe were too taboo to ask in real life. It really is probably one of the top reasons that consumers love having a digital identity, is their ability to express themselves in an extremely dynamic way. And we did a report on avatars, and we looked at all the different platforms out there. Some of them hyper realistic, where it's essentially you and me, and you've seen it when Meta was doing some of their virtual meeting demos where the person looked hyper real, just looked like them. And then there's the, highly cartoonized with companies like Bitmoji and other ones where you get to be a caricature of yourself. And people tended to want to be right in the middle. So they didn't want to be themselves necessarily because they can just be themselves. They wanted a somewhat of an interpretation of who they were. And that was true amongst most age groups, whether it was, young individuals or people that identified as older. It is also a huge security risk, right? So that's kind of an essential piece of the puzzle as it relates to whether it's platforms like VR chat or the Robloxes of the world. And as your digital identity becomes more and more important, companies that are helping to identify you as a real person and validate your identity and making sure that you're not misusing the ability to be more dynamic in your identity. And that has to do with, bullying and coercion online, and the simple act of, maybe somebody older entering a space with somebody that's younger, which is unethical and just shouldn't be happening. So the protections need to be in place to be able to make sure that people can, play. And obviously parents have oversight in that regard. But it's pretty amazing because when you let artists and you let people play, they're able to feel safer in their skin and maybe externalize that also when they're more comfortable after they've played and tested it in a safer environment where there's some anonymity to that process. So what do you think? Do you think that it's fundamentally changing who we are, Sylvia?
Yeah, I think it really challenges the idea of identity in singular. Like now it's more about identities plural. Like we are different persons throughout the day, and there's fluidity between the different people we can be on different platforms. And the thing also I see changing it. And I will make a very small parallel, but with board games. Like for a long time, you would play a board game, and with identity, there would be 4 or 5 different male personalities and maybe 1 or 2 female personalities. So you would be playing with other girls. I was playing with my sister. One of us could be the girl, and the other one had to be the guy. So for a long time, it was about female people, like I was, like getting into the shoes of a guy. And we didn't see the opposite that much along. But what I noticed, and I read online a lot about this, is now guys also explore what it is to be a female character more and more. And as you're saying, it's really all categories are exploring outside of their usual boundaries. And I think that's where there's some democratization, and there's the possibility to explore like different components of our identity to have a much more sparse personalities throughout all those platforms.
Yeah, that's really interesting. A couple of weeks ago, I did an episode of the podcast with Alexandra Whittington, and we were talking about how artificial intelligence can help with things like gender equality. And I'm wondering now if, when we're talking about these kind of technologies coming together to create these new experiences, where there's an opportunity that we've never had in humanity before, which is about exploration and self-discovery and potentially opening up to how others experience us and experience the world, and using that. And I mean, some might consider this next bit a little bit corny, but it helps us become better people, and perhaps encourage a better version of humanity through the deployment of these technologies.
Hmm. Yeah, I mean, it's a heady statement. It's it's interesting because it gives you it's all these permutations of community. And whether it's Reddit or VR chat or Fortnite, obviously by design, each platform really defines your behavior, what you're doing on there, how you're engaging with people. Um, but it's absolutely shifted, you know, how we interact with each other. And there's something really important there around the kind of, I don't want to say dehumanization, but the, disassociation, or when the technology is in between us, it's not a good thing. And we do a lot of work with Coachella, and one of my partners, he's worked there for years, and one of the best insights was try and get people's phones out of their hands, right? And that's the interesting part of where we're at right now with technology is, yeah, your phone is the conduit to everything, right? It's conduit to pictures, to payment, to connection. And right now, companies are imagining an uncoupling of that device, right? So, and you're with your Apple Watch and other things, what does it look like to remove that device but still enable the technology to connect us in meaningful ways? Because it really is a shame when I'm sitting with my friend's daughter and she's going through a transitional period in her life, and she's 20, so she doesn't really care about what I have to say anyways, but she's asking for advice and she's looking at her phone, right? And I'm trying to share, integral information with her, and I say, I'll wait until you're done texting. But the concept of, these multiple conversations happening at the same time is so embedded in how people are behaving that she was almost affronted that I asked her to put her phone down while we were having a conversation. And that needs to change, right? Like, we need to, they're all addictive, right? Like, and that's our responsibility in designing these products and services, is how do you allow them to create that wonder and play and fun and utility, but also not make us entirely dependent on it. There's a book called Stolen Focus, and it's the writer realizes they're losing focus and has issues and goes offline essentially, and goes to a small town and lives that life and writes about it and goes through the process. And obviously, I mean, the ship has sailed, right? We need to type on computers, and there's just certain things that need to happen. But I'm really excited that, again, the technology is small enough now, the hardware and software is getting to a place where we can be sitting at our couch and pop up a digital board game, or, I think also having digital twins doesn't always make sense. Sometimes you just use a board game, like just open the physical box and play the game. So when does it make sense to use it and when does it not, is really interesting. I love a future of wearables that are also semi-permanent, where you can take, flat microchips that can be just put on like a sticker, right? And what does that look like? So you've got these interesting use case based technology products that allow you to put your phone away and be present and do the thing that you're doing at that given time, which hopefully will reconnect us back with each other post-pandemic when we're on the other side of all of this stuff. Is exciting.
That's really interesting. And I'm seeing a field in which there are some experimentations happening like that, which is for the elderly, and I'm talking about the very end of life, like people in their 90s. They actually don't want to use too much technology. Sometimes they cannot read on a phone anymore. They don't want to wear their hearables, or their wearables, and they just want to disconnect. And so we're thinking about how can we help them in ways where there is no intrusion on their body, and how we can use what is existing, maybe the toilets, analysis of the toilets, excrement and so on, analysis of the light or of their movement and so on. But we're going from sensors on the body also to sensors on the structures around the nursing home rooms, or the home when they are living independently and so on. And I think that's a very interesting use case of how to detach from technology, because they don't want to use the like devices like a smartphone, for example, to use other types of technology that are farther from the body, and we're using the home in the right way. We should be using the smart home so that we can detach from our devices. I think that's an interesting field of, it's not about connected entertainment, it's more about following their health and so on. But that's a very interesting field where we see a lot of evolution that kind of connect with what you were saying.
Well, and that's, where voice technology, even so like NFC, RFID, voice technology are all areas that continue to push and show the amazing way that we can give a lot of those people more freedom and sovereignty over their lives, so they're not as codependent, whether it's as simple as like turn on the light, tell me a story, right? So the evolution of audiobooks and what are those like, and how can I even open doors and change things from we were talking to somebody, I can't remember whether it was Qualcomm, but they have a robot helper in the office, right? And I saw one at CES a couple of years ago. And why not in 5 years? Can that not be, delivering things to me if I'm, physically impaired? It's exciting that all of that's there. And sometimes the sheen and glamour of entertainment pushes a lot of these technologies forward. So then, the utility side can get the economies of scale. And that's, at the end of the day, is this thing going to be cheap enough for us to buy and use and to allow people to purchase? And I have somebody from my past who's quadriplegic, and I was there when he had his accident and when he was put into assisted living, and he was completely and totally dependent, right? For sure he will be for the rest of his life, but 20 years later, the world is opened up, and the power and the freedom that he has to order things, pay for things, access his own entertainment, the immersive nature of a lot of audio-based stuff that really they didn't have the technology to do back then is pretty spectacular. And I'll always advocate for co-creating with audiences with disabilities, because when you design for them, you ideally are designing for all, right?
That's that's really nice. I think in the interest of time, we probably need to call a halt to the conversation. But as I said at the end of the last episode, I think we could carry on this conversation for hours. One of the things that struck me that I've just written down actually is we seem to have been talking across both these episodes in kind of two journeys. One was this a kind of transition where we started with high tech, emerging technology, and how these technologies might change. And we kind of took that through to a very human perspective. And in parallel to that, we started talking about entertainment. And actually, we've ended up on individual well-being, which I think are really interesting parallel journeys. We start talking about technology and we end up talking about people and well-being. And, I think that's a really nice place to end. So, Rachel, thank you once again for your insights. This has been absolutely inspiring, I think. It's been really, really interesting. So thank you so much for your time.
For sure. Likewise. Thank you so much.
And thank you everyone for watching and listening to this and the previous episode of the podcast. What we're going to do with both these episodes is Sylvia and I are going to get together, have a think, and what we'd like to do is engage a few of our favourite people to talk about some of the wider implications on how some of these things might develop into the future. So do look out for that. In the meantime, do tell your friends and colleagues all about the podcast, and we'll see you on another episode very soon.